Hey everyone, my name is Ben and this is the Uncharted X channel. In today's video, we're going to take a look at what is probably the most precisely made granite object ever to come out of ancient Egypt. Famed archaeologist Flinders Petrie called this perhaps the finest piece of mechanical work that was ever executed in such a hard and intractable medium. I'm also going to give you my thoughts about why I don't think this box or the other granite objects of Egypt are made from some form of geopolymer. So I hope you'll stick around and let's get to it. In this video, we're taking a look at the area known as Lahoun, or it's also sometimes called Ilahoun or Kahun, and it's located to the south of the traditional pyramid belt of Giza and Saqqara, Dashur, and then down to Maidum. Lahoun itself sits very close to the opening of what is called the Fayum region, or the Fayum Oasis, which you can see here from the satellite imagery as this large green leaf-shaped space that is to the west of the Nile, and it has Lake Moeris on its northwestern corner. I talked a lot more about the Fayum in my video about Hawara and the labyrinth. In fact, the ancient name for this site literally meant mouth or opening of the canal. There are a number of ancient Egyptian sites that are in the general area of the Fayum. Hawara is one of them. That is the theorized location for the Great Labyrinth. There's also a mud brick pyramid there. And Maidum is nearby. Maidum has the broken down pyramid that is allegedly from Sneferu, or perhaps his father Huni from the end of the 3rd, start of the 4th dynasty. There's also Mastaba 17 at Maidum. I've done videos on both of these structures. The most notable feature on this site, at least above the ground, is the remnants of this mud brick pyramid. This structure is associated with Pharaoh Senusret II, who was also known as Usertesen, and he was a ruler of the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom, which was around 1890 BCE, which makes this structure at least 4,000 years old, although other areas of this site have recently been found to be significantly older than that. Looking at this pyramid today, you can still see a few large white limestone blocks in its structure. It was once cased in white limestone like this, but it unfortunately suffered the same fate as did so many other structures and monuments from ancient Egypt, and that was the usurping and the reuse of its stone by the notorious Ramses II of the 19th dynasty. He took the limestone off this pyramid for his own building purposes, and today we're just left with the mud brick internal structure that is slowly eroding. Of course, what is of more interest to us is beneath the ground here, and our exploration in this video will lead us down this shaft and into a tunnel system that leads to underneath the pyramid. I had the chance to visit here in late 2020 as part of the Uncharted X Egypt trip that I hosted along with Jimmy from the excellent Bright Insight channel. I'm sure most of you have seen his work before, but if not, make sure you do go check it out and subscribe. There's a link below. We were joined by a great group of people who were all adventurous enough to make the journey to Egypt despite all of the challenges of 2020. We got the chance to go out here and to visit the underground tunnel, the shafts, the passageways that lead to a couple of rooms that are located directly beneath the pyramid. And the footage that you're going to see is from that trip, both my footage as well as the footage from a couple of other people that were on the trip. In the modern era, this site was really first explored and documented by Sir William Flinders Petrie. He spent a couple of years in this site, and in fact in the Fayum region in general, in 1888 to around 1890, and then a couple of decades later he again came back to this region in around 1914 and did more work here. This site has only recently been opened up to the public in 2019, after renovations of this particular segment that we're visiting in the video.
This is pretty cool. Is this bedrock? Looks like it's all bedrock. This is deep. Oh, we got blocks down here too, huh?
Halfway down the entrance shaft, there is this strange little room with a couple of alcoves, and it's all been cased in what looks to be very fine work in white limestone. I'm really not sure of the purpose, but this is about halfway down this southernmost shaft that leads to these tunnels. The whole area around the Lahoun pyramid is fairly riddled with shafts, tombs, and underground structures. The sheer proliferation of shafts is one of the reasons that it took Flinders Petrie so long to find the actual entrance to the chambers that are, in fact, beneath the pyramid. Another reason for this is the fact that this entrance lies to the south of the structure, which is very much out of character for most of the pyramids. They typically have entrances on their northern sides.
I guess this was part of the slab they had to move. This probably whole slab came out, and the one in the middle here. Huh. Interesting.
So just before he was due to leave the site, Petrie had his workmen explore just another shaft opening that was on the southern side of the pyramid, and it ultimately led him to this discovery. Here you can see Petrie's drawings of the tunnels and chambers from his book Illahun, Kahun and Gurob, which was published in 1891. Petrie's shaft, when he excavated it, led him into what proved to be a broad tunnel that's quite wide and tall, and that ascends slightly up in the direction of the pyramid. And at the end of this, he found a couple of chambers. One of those is cased in limestone, and the other one is made entirely from granite, and it houses a spectacular precision granite box that's still in place today. Something else about these maps, just note at the other end of the passage, Petrie was guessing that there was another entrance, because after he measured the precision granite box, he found that it was too large to have been moved in through the original shaft that he used to enter the tunnel. So you can see that the question marks he had left on his map here, that he had theorized that there was another builder's main shaft further south of where he entered the tunnel system. Now, although he never actually excavated down in this way, he was in fact correct, and this main shaft is how we enter the site today.
Oh, we're sneaking in to the Lahun pyramid, which I have not been in before. And it opens up a bit here. Whew. Pretty.
Wow. This lighting system that they put in 2,000 years ago is really nice.
Isn't it? Yeah. It's held up really well.
Yeah.
This small alcove area that we're approaching is the original shaft entrance that Petrie used, and as you watch the shot, we'll actually pan up and you can see the size of the shaft that Petrie originally got into this tunnel area with, and you can tell it's quite a small shaft. You probably wouldn't have been able to fit this granite box down it. So as we proceed down in the video into the tunnel system, it's worth mentioning a couple of details about the history of this site. There have been some wonderful discoveries made in this area of ancient Egyptian artifacts, most notably some jewelry from the tomb of a princess, which included a golden crown that was fully complete, including the uraeus, which is the snake adornment that you find on the front of other pharaonic crowns, and there was one of these as well on the front of the Sphinx. There's a piece of it still in the museum. Now, personally, while the jewelry is beautiful and interesting, and I'm sure it came from the dynastic Egyptian civilization and burials of their royalty, I think the real treasure that is on this site is in the precision-carved granite box, which I promise we'll get to and we'll examine here pretty soon. But the other thing that I wanted to cover about this is the attribution of this site to the Middle Kingdom. When Petrie first found the chambers that are at the end of the tunnel, in them Petrie found part of a limestone stele that mentioned the pharaoh Senusret II, who back in Petrie's time was known as Usertesen, and this was a primary factor for linking the site to the Middle Kingdom. That said, archaeology on this site is still ongoing, as there are still many unexplored areas and shafts and other tombs around Lahun Pyramid. And in 2010, there were some additional discoveries made of other tombs and burials near the site that have been dated, legitimately dated back to the very first and second dynasties of ancient Egypt, which really throws the relation of this whole site to the Middle Kingdom kind of into question. In the footage, we're now getting down to the business end of the structure. We're directly beneath the pyramid, 30 feet or so down into the bedrock, and these are the chambers that were drawn on Petrie's map. The first room is cased in fine white limestone. The room with the box is just beyond it, and it's constructed entirely of granite. It has an arched ceiling, also of granite, and there is one other location in Egypt that I know of with a similar arched ceiling. See if you can guess where that is before I give the answer later on in the video. Before we take a closer look at the box, I wanted to point out another strange feature here, and that is the tunnel that wraps around the central chamber, as shown on Petrie's diagram.
Just loops around, doesn't it, and connects up. Just ducking a little bit. Opens up a bit here. Wow.
They'll see you. You can just don't down too quickly. They'll see you.
Hello, little guy. Little bat. He's looking at it.
Wow.
It won't land on. Don't move. It won't land on you. Well, it might, but.
I've seen Jumanji, okay?
There doesn't seem to be any purpose to this. I have heard that some people try to say it relates to the number 5 and to Osiris somehow, but it just seems to wrap around and then exit next to the box in the central chamber. The only other thing that I can think of is that perhaps it had some function, if this box and chamber really ever had an original functional purpose, but I really have no idea what it could be. This tunnel that wraps around the chamber gives us a second entrance into the main room, and it's here that we find this just superlative precision carved granite box, which is of course labelled as a coffin. It is no stretch to say that this is quite likely the single most precisely carved granite object that comes to us from ancient Egypt. When Petrie found it, it was just like this. There was nothing in it, there are no inscriptions anywhere, and there was no trace of any lid. A couple of features you might notice straight away. It seems to be somewhat tilted to the eye, and in fact it is. The exterior height of the box changes by about 4 inches along its length, yet the inside walls of the cavity are cut very precisely square with the top, which is just utterly flat. The floor in here in this room is level, so ultimately it's like the whole box is somehow leaning over. Now it's possible that the box was moved at some point in the room. You can't take it out of the room because it's too big for the doorways. And it's also possible that there may have been originally something beneath the box that had brought it up to level. Or perhaps the lean was some sort of deliberate measure taken for functionality. I really don't know. Certainly the precision that is evident on the rest of the box meant that this slope was a deliberate step that was taken in its manufacture. But as far as I know, none of the other precision-carved boxes anywhere in Egypt have this feature, just like none of them have the large lip that this one does around the top. It makes this box a very, very unique piece. The precision of this box becomes evident once you begin to measure it. The margin of error when measuring the flatness of the surfaces, or the margin of error between how parallel each surface is to each other, for example each end of the box, is only within a few thousandths of an inch. One way to imagine this is to imagine carving up a single inch into 1,000 equal segments, and that's the scale that you have to measure within in order to define the accuracy of the work that went into creating this artifact. It's simply astounding, and it's certainly not the product of any crude hand tools like flint chisels or diorite pounding stones. Note also that the surfaces of the box have not been polished like other boxes. They're just so finely ground as to be basically perfectly flat. The interior corners are equally exquisite, and you can see here that the radius of these internal corners is about equal to the width of the tip of a ballpoint pen, and this is an order of magnitude finer work than even the incredible boxes of the Serapeum. What's more, these tiny corner radius values are consistent, as far as I can tell, and not just on the inside. The same degree of care and precision has been applied to the corners that exist underneath the lip of the box on the outside. When you remember that this is carved from a single piece of granite, and that a single mistake could mess up the dimensions of the whole artifact, it becomes almost entirely impossible to assume that this work was done by some primitive culture using hand tools. It just isn't possible, and if somebody claims that it is possible, then the only way that you can prove that is to actually replicate this type of work with all of the most difficult measures that go into it, the internal corner radius, the flatness within thousandths of an inch, and you need to do so using the techniques that you claim they used to make it. And as far as I know, no one has ever even come close to this. Something else to keep in mind is when you add in the lip around the top of this box, it adds significant geometry and many more corners into the construction. It's really just remarkable. There's one more unique feature about this box that I haven't seen in any other boxes, and that is that the edges around the lip are consistently beveled. We also see a similar beveling on the edges of the granite blocks that make up the room itself. When Flinders Petrie discovered this box and he began to investigate it, he was simply astounded by it, and he did his best to measure it and report on just how precisely this box seems to have been constructed. Personally, I think this artifact should be scanned with modern laser-based 3D modeling tools, as well as measured with a modern surface roughness meter that is accurate down to the microns. However, and as usual, this type of work is just not a priority for modern Egyptology. It's a little sad because I'm sure that had Petrie had access to such tools, he would have enthusiastically utilized them in order to learn as much as possible about incredible ancient objects just like this one. Here is what he wrote about this box in 1891's Illahun, Kahun and Gorob. Quote, "The sarcophagus is perhaps the finest piece of mechanical work ever executed in such a hard and difficult material. The form is quite unlike that of any other coffin known, having a wide lip all around the top. Another strange peculiarity is that the bottom is of varying thickness, or the inside depth being equal all over. The outside depth slopes down nearly 4 inches from end to end. As the sides are cut square with the top and the floor is level, the ends all lean over and the top slants. In short, the whole thing is tilted by standing on a sloping bottom. The surface, though not polished, is smooth ground to an impalpable fineness and most exquisitely flat. For instance, along the top length of 106 inches, the error from a straight line are an average of 7/1000ths of an inch of error. On the ends, both 50 inches long, the errors are an average of 4/1000ths of an inch. The errors of parallelism are also very small. The north end is 50.053 and south end 50.073, or a 50th of an inch of difference on 106 inches length. The curvature of the planes is almost nothing, over the length of 82 inches, the east side hollowing 5 and the west side bulging 0.002, a difference which is probably covered by the errors of measurement owing to a slight tilt of the sarcophagus sideways. The skew of the planes of the inside is 5/1000ths on the west and 7/1000ths on the east, which again may be confounded by the slight tilt of the whole sideways, but it is almost inappreciable in any case. Lastly, after straightness, flatness, and parallelism, there is the question of ratio between the dimensions, or accuracy of proportions. This is far more difficult, and it requires all the previous accuracies, and in addition a truly divided scale, and an irredeemable truth of work, since nothing can be corrected by removing more material. This is indeed a brilliant piece of skill in such an untractable material. It would be desirable to level up the sarcophagus, and then measure it more accurately when the planes are as nearly vertical as may be, for doubtless some errors have come in the course of measuring it in its present slanting position." End quote. In this passage, Petrie is basically admitting that he didn't have the ability to accurately measure the degree of error or the margin of error in the box, when he says that the, quote, "difference is probably covered by the errors of measurement," end quote. It's utterly remarkable to think that no matter how old you think this artifact is, that we did not have the technology available to accurately measure it in the 19th century, only 120 to 150 years ago. Copper chisels and pounding stones, indeed. One other fact to ponder on with this box, and with the chamber itself, is that they are all very well aligned to the cardinal points of the compass. How exactly was this alignment managed in antiquity? We're more than 25 feet down inside the bedrock. There is no way to see the stars from up here, so I'm not sure what technique we can attribute to the supposedly primitive ancient Egyptians in order to accomplish this feat. Maybe it was just luck, or maybe it's yet another sign that there was far more going on from a technological perspective in the distant past than we currently believe. I certainly can't explain it, so if you have any ideas, please do leave a comment below. Now, before I get into explaining why I don't believe this box, nor any of the other granite works of Egypt are made up of geopolymer or some form of ancient concrete, let's return to the ceiling of the room itself with its arched granite slabs. If you guessed that the other ancient Egyptian site with this feature was the Pyramid of Menkaure at Giza, then a gold star for you. Petrie himself noted the similarity between the chambers in these structures, and given that the Menkaure pyramid is generally attributed to the 4th dynasty, it seems to throw the whole Middle Kingdom dating of this site at Lahoun into some question, although I personally think that both of these constructions could be significantly older. Here you can see the arched ceiling inside the chamber of the Pyramid of Menkaure on the Giza Plateau, and this footage was taken several years ago on an earlier trip of mine to Egypt. It's interesting that they went to the trouble to do this because just like at Lahoun, this chamber has been carved from the bedrock beneath the pyramid, and it was then lined with what seems to have been a very accurately arched ceiling. And although it's not there anymore, there once was a precision-carved granite box housed in this chamber beneath the Pyramid of Menkaure. It certainly does make one wonder about any possible connections or original functional purpose for both the shape of the room and perhaps of the box.
So now I want to get into some of the reasons why I don't think this box, or really any of the granite artifacts, or even the limestone artifacts for that matter in Egypt, are made from some form of geopolymer or poured aggregate. Now I wanted to talk about this because I know there's been a really long documentary that's come out recently on this topic, and I wouldn't be exaggerating to say I've probably had more than 100 comments about people asking for my opinion on this, or that they're just stating that that's how this stuff was all clearly done, that it was all melted down and then reformed and repoured. I don't think that's the case. I'm not saying it's impossible. In fact, I think the geopolymer theory does have some merit and some promise, particularly in South America. Sites like Tiwanaku in particular, I know there's been some studies done there, but I really am still quite skeptical about it. I think it's got a long way to go, and as with any theory like this that claims to know or say that they know how it was done, it has to overcome all the aspects of the problem, and it has to address all of the challenges with the problem. That said, I do hope that there is more legitimate scientific studies and experiments and work done in this area. Who knows? Maybe they'll be right. Maybe you'll one day be able to buy a bag of aggregate mix and have it coming out looking like granite. I certainly have my doubts, but before you write that comment saying that you know how it was done and it was done with geopolymers, at least listen to the other side of this argument as I explain some of these reasons. First of all, we have quarries and we have unfinished works. We almost have in Egypt examples of the work from the quarry to the shaping to the finished product. We have examples of almost every phase of these things, whether you think it was done with pounding stones and copper chisels or with advanced tools and technology, which I think there's certainly a case to be made for some of the objects. When it comes to granite, I mean, some of the best examples we have are in the Aswan quarry, in the granite quarry there. We literally have stones that are in the process of being shaped and pulled out of the bedrock. Most famously, we have the unfinished obelisk there, but it's not the only stone that's in the bedrock that is being shaped and it is being removed from the quarry. Now, if you were just there to either melt the stone and collect it and somehow reset it, or you were just looking to grind it into a powder, you wouldn't be shaping those stones out of the quarry. We also have unfinished items. For a good example of this is the box that sits in the hallway of the Serapeum. There's also a couple of other unfinished boxes there. You can clearly tell from this box that it still has a lot of work to be done to it. And for that matter, we actually have hammering tool marks on those boxes. They have been worked on with some form of iron chisel or some form of chisel. We literally have the tool marks in the stone, and we know that there are other boxes in that site that are in a finished state. So there is work being done on them with tools of one form or the other in order to get them into that shape. This is also the case for a lot of the limestone blocks that are used in large Egyptian construction projects. For example, the pyramids. I've heard it said by a lot of people that, you know, the blocks that were made up in the pyramids or the casing stones of the pyramids were made by some form of geopolymer. It's just not the case, because we have quarries for that stone. If you look behind the second pyramid, the pyramid of Khafra, at the back where the hill has been carved out, right in the corner, you can actually see the square blocks in the ground that show you where they've quarried blocks out and they've cut them off. They're in that shape. And then they've been used in the construction of the pyramid. Secondly, and this is kind of just a logical point, it's the fact that every stone is a different shape and size. And this applies more to the giant building projects than it does to sort of single piece objects. But in the case of things like the pyramids or like the Valley Temple, for example, every block is a different shape and size. And this is also the case for the casing stones on the pyramids. Not just the internal stones, also the casing stones are all individually shaped. This presents quite a big problem for the geopolymer theory, because you have to make a mold for every single stone. It just doesn't make any sense. So to take the case of the Great Pyramid, there's something like 2.3 million blocks of limestone used in its construction. If you were doing that with a geopolymer, you would have had to make 2.3 million molds. It really doesn't make sense. We use geopolymers in modern construction today with bricks and things like that, but typically you'll get one mold and you might make millions and millions of bricks from that one mold, and all of the blocks that are used in construction are of the same shape and size. Thirdly is that we have tool marks and we have machining marks. We have both the primitive style of tool marks and machine marks that I think were done by the dynastic Egyptians, but we also have advanced tooling and machining marks that come from some of the more precision objects, the granite objects, the stuff that I think may have come from an earlier period. Now, that just doesn't, I mean, if you're casting this or you're making these objects in a mold, why then do you need to cut them with a massive circular saw? We see examples of sort of massive circular saw cuts at Abu Sir. We see them at Abu Rawash. They're in other places. We have overcuts in the granite, in statues, for example, and in obelisks and some of those types of things. There are cuts where saws have gone a little too far into the material and then been backed out. We also have the tubular drill marks. This is actually also the case in Tiwanaku. Even on that site, in various locations, you still have machining marks and indications that that rock has been shaped with tools. A fourth reason, and this is something that I think applies to both granite and limestone, but we'll start with granite, is that the geopolymer idea, it's just not how granite works, for want of a better term. Granite, the term granite itself, is something of a cover-all term for all of the different types of stone that sort of fall under that granite family. Every outcropping of granite is slightly different. You've got granite, granodiorite, you've got different colors of granite, they have different levels of material in them, and granite itself is an aggregate. Inside the granite, when you wash off the stone or you polish the stone, you can see the different types of materials, and they're actually chunks of material. There's quartz, there's feldspar, there's mica, there's hornblende, there's all sorts of components that make up granite. So if your idea is that you're melting all of that stone, then how are you forming these individual lumps of different types of stone inside the mix itself? Or if you're grinding the stone, how are you getting lumps of quartz that are of varying different sizes based on wherever the quarry was? For that matter, we also have veins of material that are quite clear on several granite objects. There's a box in the Serapeum, or a couple of them actually, that have these large veins of material that are really only possible because that's how the material was formed over thousands or millions of years of heat and pressure in the crust of the earth as it cooled. We also have other types of stone like that. There are even objects made from conglomerate, which is even more of a mix of materials than granite itself. And you might have flint and quartzite and things like that all mixed together. There's an example of just what must have been a massive statue at Tanis. You can see its thumb here. This is made of a conglomerate of different materials. This is not something that can be achieved by, grinding up a material or melting a stone and then recasting it. You clearly have different forms of different materials in the stone. This is also the case for the limestone. In particular, I'm going to talk about the limestone of the Giza Plateau because that's where I've seen so many examples of this. Limestone being a sedimentary stone, the Giza Plateau was once a seabed. So you find quite often, you'll see seashells and fossils and things like that in the limestone. That's at the Giza Plateau. You see this in the bedrock. You also find these fossils in the blocks. And this is how you know these blocks have been taken from the Giza Plateau. They've been carved out. But in both cases, we've got fossils actually in the bedrock. We've got fossils actually in the limestone that is in the monuments. And again, these wouldn't exist if you were either grinding up the stone to make some sort of powder that then you mixed and poured as an aggregate. And they wouldn't be in there if you were just melting the stone either. And really the last point that I wanted to make about this, and this is kind of just the one theory that I've heard from so many people, is that there was somehow the ancients were creating these giant solar magnifying glasses, these huge lenses that would focus sunlight, and that's how they would melt the granite, or they would melt the diorite and form these slurries and somehow pour these stones. The idea of creating massive lenses out of quartz that then you would use to melt other stones that include quartz. First of all, you've got to ask, how are you melting the quartz in the first place to create this lens? And secondly, I would encourage anyone who is really interested in this idea to go and look at just how difficult it is to create the large pieces of glass that get turned into mirrors for large telescopes. There's really only 1 or 2 places in the world that even attempt this these days. But you're quite literally talking about years of cooling, years of polishing, to create these huge pieces of just flat glass that then get covered and turned into a mirror. You almost have a high degree of precision that's required to create something that's convex enough to then focus sunlight and create a magnifying glass. This is a seriously high technology undertaking, and I really don't know that there's any evidence for it, apart from the fact that someone needs to demonstrate this, start melting granite and see how far you get. In any case, all I'm really saying here is that I think there are significant hurdles to that theory. There are significant problems with it. I'm certainly not saying that I definitely know it wasn't done. I really do hope there is more experimentation done, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I'd be happy to if we get to a point where we can say we definitely know how this was done. I just think there are significant, not only practical problems with the theory, but also logical ones. When you look at the evidence that's on these sites, you look at the evidence in the quarries, and you look at the geology of the stone itself, it's just not how it works. So I just encourage everyone to keep an open mind. It's always good to explore all of these alternative theories, but then you've got to put them against the test of sort of logic and look at the evidence that's at hand. Okay, so coming back to this remarkable precision box that's underground the pyramid at Lahoon, where do I think this leaves us? Well, once again, I think it's possible that we're looking at a case of inheritance, of renovation, and of reuse, and an underground structure that is possibly far older than Orthodox history would have us believe. Once again, we see a case of some tremendously advanced technological sophistication found beneath the ground, in this case in the tunnel system and in the room and the box that are made from granite. Once again, we see that these underground structures have a very low technology work that's built on top of them, in this case a mud brick pyramid. Can we really confidently say that the work below the ground happened at the same time as that above it? Remember that the primary method of dating these sites and relating them into the story of history is by the writing that is found on them, or on objects in them. While Petrie did find a 12th dynasty limestone stele down here, one that is now in a museum, there are no inscriptions to be found anywhere on the granite, not on the chamber and not on the box itself, which was also found entirely empty. If I had found this place as an Egyptian king, and I found it to be profound, I might have claimed it and used it for my purposes. It's just human nature. After all, we discovered this site in modern times thanks to Flinders Petrie. We have renovated it, and today we reuse it for our own purposes, and not as a tomb, but rather as a tourist attraction. Just something to think about. So there it is, there's a look at the just wonderful precision carved granite box that's beneath the Lahoon pyramid. I was very happy to get the chance to go there. I've also given you some thoughts on why I don't think this was made from a geopolymer, although I'm sure I'll see plenty of contrary opinion to that in the comments section. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I wanted to say just a massive thank you to everybody that supports the channel. You guys are really the only reason that I'm able to continue making and producing these videos, so thank you very much. Anyone that's interested in supporting the channel, all the details are on my website. It's unchartedx.com/support. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've got a lot more content planned for this year, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.